were very happy indeed to respond to the invitation of Bishop Hugh to share with you the relics of St. Maximilian Kolbe. We want to thank the bishop as well as Father Keith, who has welcomed us so warmly here to the cathedral. Well, the year was 1961. I was just 9 years old, and I was waiting for the train. I was on the platform in my hometown in Nova Scotia, Canada, waiting for my first train trip to the capital of Halifax. And I was so excited to think, oh, my first trip on a train. And I remember as the train rolled in, this big silver, brilliant in the sun train called the rail liner was going to take me to the big city. Excited as I was, I couldn't have known, because I was too young, that only 20 years earlier, trains had been used to bring people to their death. Trains were not something to be joyous about. Trains had been used in concentration camps to bring people like cattle in cattle cars to their death. And in fact, that's what happened in 1941. Maximilian Kolbe, the great Polish saint at the time, had been working in Niepokalanów, the city of the Immaculate that he had dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Immaculate Mother of God, and had been publishing in his magazine, you know, the magazine, The Night of the Immaculate, or Crusader, as we call it here in the British Isles. The magazine had been a place where Maximilian would write articles, and the Nazis, of course, were angered by the fact that he would write about truth, because they alone had the truth, and he, in fact, was criticizing, they felt, their way of governing. And so they arrested Father Kolbe the end of May 1941 and boarded him on a train that took him to Oświęcim, or Auschwitz, as it was called by the Nazis. And there he spent 2.5 months. 2.5 weeks before he died, though, this is what happened. There was a prisoner who escaped. And so in punishment, the Nazis decided that 10 people had to die because one had escaped. 10 would go to the death bunker, and by starvation, they would die. The 10 people were selected by Commander Fritsch. The 10 were individually picked. One of them exclaimed, "But what is going to happen to my wife and 2 young children?" His name was Franciszek Gajowniczek. And Father Kolbe sprang into action. He went to Commander Fritsch and said, "I'll take the man's place," because he wanted to defend the man's right to life, the right to bring up the 2 children who otherwise would have been without a father. And so Commander Fritsch decided in that moment, he could have said, "All right, Father Kolbe, you'll go and you'll die with them as well. That'll be 11 who will die." But no, he did allow Father Kolbe to take Franciszek's place. And so they were all 10 men sent to the starvation bunker, and there for 2.5 weeks, they were not fed, and gradually they passed on. Father Kolbe was one of the last to live. And you know, this chamber of horror was turned into a little church. Witnesses themselves said they never heard the screams, the pain and suffering. They heard songs to Mary, songs to our Lord. They heard the rosary being said, prayers being said. Father Kolbe was a spiritual resource for all the prisoners, and he consoled and built them up by his own faith. But finally, the Nazis couldn't resist it anymore. Father Kolbe was still living. They sent a doctor in and gave him an injection of carbolic acid, and he died August the 14th, 1941. The whole church, the whole world prayed for his beatification in 1971, very quickly. In the church's way of doing things, that was very quick. He was beatified in 1971, and in 1982, declared a saint by Pope St. John Paul II. Pope John Paul II declared him a martyr of charity, the first time in the Catholic Church that a saint, a martyr, was declared a martyr because of charity alone. You see, the Nazis didn't kill Father Kolbe because of his faith, or they didn't say to him, "We're going to kill you unless you renounce your faith." No, that wasn't why he was a martyr. This is the first time in the history of the church that a saint would be made because of their extreme love, that they put into practice what the gospel says. There's no greater love than if someone lays down their life for their brother. And so, on October the 10th, 1982, Pope St. John Paul II canonized Maximilian Mary Kolbe. You know who was on St. Peter's Square that day? Franciszek Gajowniczek lived to see the day that Kolbe was made a saint. And the two Polish men, John Paul II and Gajowniczek, embraced at that moment. It was so emotional for all of us to see. And so John Paul II said, this man, Maximilian, the great Polish saint, is a saint for our difficult century. And I want to tell you today, if you think that the 20th century was difficult, well, look out. Because this century, if we ever needed Kolbe, we need him now. This is even a more difficult century. Because if you think back at the time of the Second World War, Poland and Maximilian were surrounded by the isms of godlessness. On the east, communism. On the west, Nazism. Well, today, the world really hasn't changed because we are still surrounded by the isms of godlessness, secularism, and atheism. It's very difficult to be faith-filled people in society today. It's very difficult to have your faith because authorities tell us all the time that we have to be mindful of everyone in secular society, that secularism is the way to go in a liberal democracy. And so faith sometimes is looked at as an imposition. Let's look at that one issue of defending the right to life, which Maximilian Kolbe is the patron of the cause for the right to life. And no wonder, because he defended it to his death. And today, nevertheless, secularism drives us away from any right to life. In the end, it's everybody's choice to have an abortion. Everyone can decide. God has no place in that. We can't express our faith and say it's God's right to determine life and death from the moment of conception until the moment God himself calls us. We know that it's wrong in our faith, and we should stand up and be counted as faith-filled people and defend life. I'll tell you where I'm from in Canada, the liberal activist judges on the Supreme Court of Canada have decided that the Parliament has to make a law guaranteeing death with dignity. That when people decide, the doctor has to help them commit suicide. Death with dignity, it's called. Listen, don't get on that train. Don't follow that train of thought. It leads to death. Instead, promote, as St. John Paul II said, a culture of life. Promote life. And take on the cause with the great saints of the church, like Maximilian Kolbe, whose relics now give us a window on heaven. At the end of Mass, we will invite you to venerate the relics of this saint. I'll just explain to you what the reliquarium stands for. The Franciscans in America share this relic with our Franciscans in Poland. And I'll tell you how we even have a relic of St. Maximilian. If he died in Auschwitz and was cremated, how is it that we even have a relic? Well, this is what happened. Before he was arrested by the Nazis, he knew that his Franciscan habit would infuriate the Nazis. But also, he had a beard because he had been in the missions. In Poland, if you're a priest and wear a beard, it usually means that you were in the missions. And so he didn't want to infuriate them anymore. What he did was, he called one of the brothers, who was the barber at Niepokalanów. He asked him to shave off his beard. Well, Brother Camille was very obedient, and he decided, yes, okay, we'll shave the beard off. And at the end, he gathered the beard into a towel and threw it into the stove near him, because Maximilian didn't want him to save it. He didn't like that idea. He had tried to save it, but Maximilian said, throw it in the stove, which he did. Then Maximilian was called to do some chores around the friary, and he left. And fortunately for us, the stove wasn't on. So Brother Camille was able to retrieve the beard, and that is the only first-class relic we have of the saint. So in the 1960s, our general in Rome, who was an American at the time, went to Poland, and they shared some of the shavings of the beard with the general who gave it to us. So here in the reliquarium, you have some of the shavings from the beard that are on this circular disc at the center on a diamond cloth. Here at the base, this gold-plated base is the map of Poland. From there, that fertile ground where the vocation was gifted to Maximilian, you see the vine growing. And the vine grows up, but there are a lot of thorns here, very sharp thorns that represent Auschwitz. Alongside, though, the cord of the Franciscans with the 3 vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Of course, the Franciscan vocation grows above the thorns and ultimately wins, if you will. Father Kolbe's life of purity, represented by the lily, and this other flower is the tulip. The Nazis thought that he'd wither and fade, that he'd give up and fall over. But he is resilient, and his life of faith is so a brilliant an example for us that the tulip stands erect on this reliquary, which was made in Poland in the 1970s. Because of the thorns here on the reliquarium, we don't want you to approach this reliquarium. You might lose an eye. So we have another relic, first-class relic in the statue, which will be offered to you for veneration at the end of Mass. By venerating the relic, you can kiss it, or touch it, or just bow to it. Then after you do that, if you'd like to take a closer look at this relic, you can come up to the table and have a look at the reliquarium, or take a picture and pray through the intercession of Maximilian for all the Franciscans and for whatever needs you might have in your own families and in the community. Thank you.